And welcome back to another episode of TWiP Weddings. Once again, my name is Bruce Clark, and I'm joined as always by Mr. Robert Evans and Mr. Brian Caparici. Morning, guys.
Hello, hello.
We finally got all the technical bugs sorted out, and we're ready to roll. So,
Did that thing where did you go live?
Yep.
Never mind.
Yeah. We are live.
This is behind the scenes. This
Behind
is
the
live.
scenes.
This is
Yeah.
what it's like to record a podcast.
Yes, raw and uncut.
That's right.
Excellent. Well, this week we're gonna dig into a pretty interesting topic that I think we've kind of touched on briefly in other episodes before, but we're going to really pay it some justice this week. So we're going to be talking about managing client expectations. And I think one of the best ways to avoid issues with customer service and ensure that you've got a great customer experience is by managing and controlling client expectations kind of right from the start of your relationship. And so we're going to share ways that we do that with our clients and kind of manage that relationship and expectations throughout the duration of our interactions with our clients. But before we do that, we want to remind you ways that you can participate in the show. We've got a bunch of different ways you can interact with us. First off, you can visit the website at www.thisweekinphoto.com/weddings, and there you will find the show notes for each episode. And those show notes contain links to everything we talk about on the show. And you're also welcome to leave your comments and feedback for us in the comments section. We'd love to hear from you. Tell us what you think of the topics we're talking about. Is it useful information? Is it not useful? Is there information we're not providing that you'd like to hear? And that may inform future topics, future episodes. If you do have a question, another way you can get a hold of us is through email. So if you want to email us, our email address is twipwed@thisweekinphoto.com. Or if you prefer using social media, just add the hashtag TWiPWed to your post, and we'll periodically keep our eye out for those posts as well. And if you want to sort of follow us and interact with us, we've got a couple of options. We're on Instagram, so you can follow us at TWiPWed, and we have a Facebook group. So facebook.com/groups/TWiPWed, and we'll post in there as well. So without further ado, let's jump into the show, and we want to talk this week about managing client expectations. So I think many of the issues that photographers struggle with when it comes to customer service are usually a direct result of not properly managing client expectations. Would you guys agree?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about how to go about managing client expectations, why it's important, and we're going to share some of the most important expectations to set to avoid stress and ensure that you can have a positive customer service experience with your clients. So I know that Brian, you've taught on this topic specifically and written quite extensively on this topic as well. So this is kind of one of those topics that's near and dear to your heart.
Oh, yeah.
And Robert, I'm sure you've the same with your years of experience shooting weddings. You've probably learned a lot and figured out how to set client expectations. So I want to ask you both kind of what do we mean first off by setting client expectations?
I think well, you can take the word expectation, and it also ends in the same word as the same letters as communication. And I think that's really where the key is there, is basically upfront, letting the clients know what to expect, but also in turn, telling them what you expect of them as well. Because again, like any relationship, it's mutual, and both people have to know what side. And when we started talking about doing this topic, of course, you can't get away from the thought of contract. And the contract, I think, is the most important part, not the most important, but a very integral part of this process. And I know as time goes on, and we've talked about this before, but in my business, my contract evolves as things change and technology changes and things like that. So I think it's important to stay on top of that. But it's a broad topic. I mean, just beyond contract, I think that's a very important part. It's just upfront communicating with your clients, telling them, how you work, what you do, how the process is going to go, and then, moving forward.
Okay, I want to come back on a question for you about contracts and how you kind of go through those with your clients. But I want to see, Brian, kind of what's your take on how do you view expectations or setting client expectations?
Well, I think fundamentally the idea of client expectations is that and if I just pull up an article that I wrote about it, and in it I defined what expectations actually mean via the dictionary. And an expectation is defined as a strong belief that something will happen or be the case in the future. And I think the very problem with that is that oftentimes as photographers, we're so close to what we're doing. We know our own policies. We know what goes on. We know what timelines are like. We know what turnaround is like. And so we kind of often make the assumption that our clients know these kinds of things. And even again, if you reference sort of thesaurus.com, assumption is synonymous with expectation.
Right.
And I think that inherently is the problem that most photographers will run into, is that they kind of make the assumption, oh, my clients know these things. The client makes their own assumption, and that's where we end up having this clash of beliefs and clash of understandings. I think at the very basis of it, we have to understand that every client will come to us as photographers with sort of a pre-existing understanding or set of expectations or assumptions on how things will happen. They might have experience with another photographer, and with that photographer they got digital files, but maybe you don't offer digital files. They may have been in a wedding party last year and that photographer came to the prep. Maybe they're assuming that you're just going to come to the prep. So they come with their own set of expectations based on their experience with photography, based on their upbringing, based on their own belief system. And unless we actually address that and, like Robert said, communicate what our guidelines are, what our policies are, you're every single time going to run into a clash of expectations, and that's where we run into big customer service issues. So I think that's like the crux of it, in the sense that they come with one set of understanding, you have your policies. Unless they match up, you're going to run into issues. So setting expectations is the process of making them match up.
Right, I agree, and I think we've all heard the saying, assume makes we know what assuming does, makes an ass out of you and me, right, and yeah, you're right. I think a lot of people come in with certain expectations, and maybe like you say, they've learned them from another photographer that they worked with, or maybe they read about something on a one of these many wedding sites that give advice and things, and so they might come in with a certain set of expectations. So for both of you, I want to ask, how do you know what your clients' expectations are? How do you go about figuring out what your clients' expectations are, and then make sure you're giving them your side, so they make sure that they're of the understanding that this is the expectation and it's not what they maybe have in their mind?
I think you just have to simply ask. I guess you could take, when you said that, the first thing I think of is, running down the wedding day and how I think that works and how I work, and I do that in the consultation. So we're talking, I kind of give them an idea, but I think whether I started or they started, at some point I ask, what do you want? What do you want to happen? What shots are important to you that day? What have you seen that you like and that you don't like? Those type of things. I mean, of course, you're going to probably get a client that loves your work, and so that's why they're hiring you. But, I've had brides ask me for shots that I probably normally would have not shot. And I don't care whether you think that shot is hokey or not. If it's important to her, I'm going to shoot it. It may not, again, end up in my portfolio or on my page or my blog, but it's important to her, so I want to make sure that I get that. So I always ask those questions, what do you want, what do you not like, those type of things. And I think that's just the easy way. Again, it's, back and forth. It's a dialogue between you and your client.
Yeah, and I think that falls into the category. Brian, I was reading your article. It was a great article because I really like the way you kind of boiled it down to four kind of key areas. And I think what Robert is talking about is kind of in the deliverables. But you sort of broke it down and sort of said these are kind of the general categories of expectations. You've got timelines, deliverables, price, and availability. So I'd like to maybe touch on each of those. So I think those are really good broad categories to define these things. So when we talk about deliverables, let's start there, since Robert kind of put us in that direction. Let's start with deliverables. So when you talk about deliverables with clients, obviously, having that conversation with them at the beginning as to what to expect. Let me throw a situation. I see this all the time on forums. People posting, photographers posting. After the fact, they've got clients either demanding more images, or they want the raw files. We've probably all seen that, and maybe even encountered that with a client or two over the years. How does that relate in terms of the deliverables? What's the problem there? What's the issue that's occurring there that you see in your mind?
Well, I think it actually comes back to perhaps even a bigger problem than just that deliverables one, and I can maybe comment on that one specifically. But if I maybe just for a second pull away from that and say that that is probably being asked and that's probably being expected because you hadn't explicitly discussed that beforehand. So again, they came in with the expectation that they would get RAWs. You didn't explicitly say that they weren't getting RAWs, so they had nothing left but to assume that that was the case. So I think that happens tens, if not hundreds of times for many different kinds of policies or guidelines or expectations that are just not communicated properly. And so I think the bigger answer here is to be extremely explicit in your communication and everything that you do with your client. I sort of think that I've identified 5 main ways that you can communicate these policies and these ideas, and it's not just all in one format. Like, you can't go through every single policy you have in person with a policy guideline with your clients. But at least if you make an effort of doing it in many different ways, whether you talk about it on your website or you blog about it or you use social media or you do it in an email or you do it in your contract or you do it in an in-person meeting, these are the kinds of things that you have to be explicit about, and you can't make assumptions. So specifically about that situation, I would say that it could be avoided by having the conversation about what they're actually getting. Like when you're doing your first meet and greet, make it a point to work that into a conversation. I don't think it's entirely useful if you just say, okay, Mr. Client, like, let's sit down and I'm going to walk you through all my policies so that there's no misunderstandings here. That's not really a useful way to go through it because it's going to feel very lawyery. It's going to feel very like, here's a policy guideline, let's walk through each line item individually. Yeah. I think that what we need to do is understand what are the things that we want to be communicating, what are the policies we want to be talking about, and try and work them into a conversation in a way that's conversational. So for example, for that particular example, when I'm sitting down at the meet and greet with a client, I might say something like, I'm curious to hear what your experience is like with other photographers in the past. Have you ever been photographed professionally? Have you ever been in a wedding party? What was your experience like in that situation? They might talk a little bit about it. I might then say something like, that's really interesting. What did your friend, what did your family member, whatever it is, your sibling, what did they get from their wedding afterwards? Did they get a beautiful album? Did they get just like a boring old CD of images? What did they do with those photos? And that then starts the conversation, and then you can say, well, great, every one of my clients actually gets a beautiful wedding album. Let me go ahead and show you one of those. With that wedding album, you'll also get the archived JPEGs on a USB key. So like I'm making a point of having that conversation, but not in a way of just saying, here's what you're going to get, period. There's no conversation around it. I think it needs to be, like Robert said it perfectly, I think it needs to be like that ping pong match where it's like asking questions, having dialogue, and sort of having a conversation about it instead of you dictating your policies.
Right. So Robert, I want to come back a little bit to contracts. One of the things you started off with was talking about contracts. So I think outlining and specifying those things in the contract would be a key element. How do you deal with clients that just don't read that stuff? And they come back afterwards and they still have it.
And it just also, I want to just sort of add on to what Brian said. You have to choose when you have those specific conversations depending on what you're going to talk about. Yep. So sometimes my thought when he was talking is like, ooh, I wouldn't want to have maybe that conversation before they've given me a deposit and signed a contract. But once they do, and a good time maybe to reiterate all that stuff is your final consultation a week or so before you do the wedding and you're sitting down with them, or while you're doing the engagement sitting, you're having conversation, you're dialoguing. I think that's a good time. So all I want to say is just use common sense when you bring up those topics, because sometimes some of them can be touchy.
Right. Well, I think also with that, Robert, like you don't want to overwhelm them either, right? You don't want to have all those at the same time. So like space it out to when it's appropriate.
Right. Talk a little bit, about lighter stuff at the engagement shoot, and maybe when it's 2 weeks before the wedding, you are reiterating, all right, so you're going to get your proofs in this time frame, and we're going to do an album afterwards, and my policy is, and I get this question a lot, is yes, I kind of can't get around the digital files. Some I sell, some I don't, but I make sure that they understand you are not going to get your digital files until after the albums and all the orders are done. And I do that for a specific reason, so that it motivates them to get their albums done. And it's like the one thing we have left, because I still to this day am, and right now I'm delivering stuff that I shot film, if you want to go that far back.
Yeah.
Because people just take their time and drop off the face of the earth. And so anyway, as far as contract goes, again, your contract needs to evolve as things change. It's okay for something to come up and it happened to you, but you need to say to yourself right then and there, all right, this is never going to happen to me again, because I'm going to adjust my contract so that it clearly states what my expectations are. I can name several things in my contract that have changed over the years. My cancellation policy, how I deal with digital files and what they get. We were just talking about that. The second photographer issue, like before we had digital and iPhones, which is the problem now, we still always had, the Uncle Harry or Uncle Bob, whatever you want to call him, at the wedding, and so dealing with that. So I've always had those things that I would sort of enhance or continue to add to my contract. Making sure that they understand what's in the contract, again, I think goes back to us as the photographers, but specifically for items that you want to make sure that they understand, I do this in my contract, they have to initial that clause as well as sign it. So one of them is understanding, the aspects of somebody else taking pictures at a wedding, and I want you to initial that. I am the only photographer that's there at the wedding, and if I'm not, understand that, I could walk away until that stops. That type of thing. I've changed my cancellation policy over the years. I think we've talked about this before because it happened to me many, many years ago. And I did get the client to pay me because I threatened to sue them and told them that I had a contract. And, I got lucky and they did. But then I changed my cancellation policy to 90 days or more, 60 to 90 days, and 60 days or less. And there's all different things that happen within that. And I have to say, I have 2 different times I've had clients cancel under 60 days prior to the wedding, and both times I got paid in full because it's in my contract without question. They I understand we have to pay you, and they did.
Yeah.
So I think it's important, just as those items go on, if you really want to make sure, have them initial it and then discuss it with them. Again, maybe you wait until, I don't know if it's deceptive or not, but we don't always want to get into the depths of the contract because you don't want to throw up roadblocks before they sign it and give you a deposit. But maybe once they do, it's their job to read the contract. We can all put ourselves in that place. Like, how many times when we get software, how many times do we ever read any of that stuff? We just accept it so we can get the software. We don't really read what's in it. But it is your job, as a purchaser or a buyer, to read the contract and know what you're signing. But maybe, again, at the final consultation, it could be one of those things that you're just reminding them, like, remember, I'm the only photographer that's going to be there. Other guests taking pictures is a like, you're just sort of as light as possible going over those things. So I think, again, that's the best way to do it in my business.
I agree. I think looking at things, if there's a common issue that's happened more than once, I think that's an opportunity where you have to sit down and say, why does this issue, why is it occurring? And is it because we're not managing expectations properly? Did we not define it properly in the contract? Did we not include it in one of our meetings with our clients? And then make a point to change your policy or update your contract, or make a point of bringing that up, in whatever meetings you have with your clients. I think it's always an opportunity to improve on those things so that you can avoid, the possibility of those things, happening.
Something that you said, this is really, this can apply to anything in life, but I do this a lot at my weddings too. If something happens like that, if my bride runs late and she's not within my 3-hour timeline or whatever, because I do my best, as human beings, I think we need to accept responsibility for those things and not blame, because it's so easy to blame somebody else for blah, 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 blah. But if you have that attitude, like, okay, my bride was late today, even though I did da-da-da-da-da to make sure she was on time, what could I do better? Accept that is your problem or your situation, but determined to make it better. And if you have an attitude like that, when things like happen to you in life and you accept responsibility for them and not blame other people for your problems, you will grow, you will be a better individual, your business will be better. I mean, it's those type of things where you're like, all right, I'm going to accept responsibility for this and I'm not going to let it happen to me again.
Yep, agreed. So I think another area, sort of a key area, is availability, and I think this is a really important one. And I think this is one that right from the very beginning, your very first point of contact with a client is going to set the expectation and dictate kind of when you're available and when clients can get a hold of you. Because we've got so many means of getting a hold of people these days. We've got text, we've got phone, we've got email, we've got Google Hangouts, we've got there's so many different ways of getting hold of people. And I think there's a lot of people that complain that they don't, I hear a lot of photographers that say, oh man, I'm always working, or I don't have this work-life balance, but they're answering emails at midnight, and they're, clients are phoning them at 10:30 at night and things like that, and they're actually, without realizing it, they're actually encouraging that behavior because they haven't managed the expectation. So how do you balance, here's my question to both of you. Let's say a lot of inquiries we get tend to come in the evenings because people are at home, they're on the computer or whatever. We get an inquiry at 9 o'clock at night, 9:30 at night. They always say that if you respond to that inquiry within a half an hour or 15 minutes, you stand a greater chance of hopefully getting a meeting with that couple and hopefully even book them. But how do you balance that with resisting that temptation of, okay, now if I respond to that email at 10 o'clock at night, now I've set the expectation that the client now knows, okay, Bruce is at his computer at 10 o'clock at night. I can call him or email him at 10 o'clock at night, and I know he's gonna contact me back, versus waiting till the next business day, and maybe by then it's too late because 5 other photographers have already gotten back to them. How do you manage that? Brian, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, here we go. I have some good thoughts on this. First, I want to set the expectation in the photographer's mind, like our listeners, to say, and this is perhaps a little bit bold, but it's okay. I'm all right saying this. Nothing that we do really could be considered to be urgent. If I get an email from my client saying, hey, I want to book our engagement session, when's good for you? Me replying within 15 minutes is not, that's not an urgent kind of request. That it's like, oh my gosh, things are burning down and I need to reply right away. It's like, no, waiting 12 hours is not going to be a horrible thing in that particular situation. So I would just encourage photographers to get out of the mindset. Often when we get emails like that or inquiries or whatever it is, we see it because we have our phones and we check it and we read it immediately, and our brain automatically will start processing it and feeling like we should reply to it right away. Get out of that mode because you don't need to reply to it right away. It's not urgent. Nothing that we do, I don't think, can be considered urgent unless it's on a wedding day and you get an email from your client saying, hey, where are you? You were supposed to start 5 minutes ago. That would be considered urgent, but I would say anything shy of that could not be considered urgent, and it would be okay to wait. I also think, just as a side note, this is in perhaps the sales side of things, I don't think that we should be replying to emails, inquiries right away anyways. I actually don't think that it reflects well on us if we reply to inquiries right away, because what does that say? Especially if it's at nighttime, if I inquire with a service provider at 10 o'clock at night and I get a reply within 15 minutes, I'm thinking either A, they're desperate for my business, what's wrong with them that they're so desperate, and B, it's just setting a completely wrong expectation with me that they're going to reply to every email from now on within 15 minutes of me sending them an email. So I don't think that we should be replying anyways. That being said, I think that with availability, you said it exactly right, Bruce. Our clients will mimic what we put back at them. So if we treat them and we show them that we'll reply within 15 minutes, regardless of what time of the day, then that's what they're going to expect from us from that point forward. So I think that we need to set that expectation right up front, right from the first inquiry, to say, these are the hours that I'm replying to emails, or these are the times I'm replying to emails. If you get in their head that you're replying within 15 minutes every time, they're going to expect that every single time.
Yeah, you're conditioning them.
Totally, you're conditioning them. You're setting that expectation that that's what they can expect. I think, let's just say that you're a photographer and you're saying, listen, Brian, I'm a busy working mom and I've got kids, and so the time that I answer emails is at nighttime. Okay, that's totally fine. What I would consider doing is use a tool such as Boomerang for Gmail, which is a plugin that you can, in fact, maybe that'll be my pick of the week. It's a plugin that you add into Gmail that allows you to write your response, and then instead of clicking the send button, you click the Send Later button, and then you specify when that email will actually be sent out. So if you're writing all your emails to your clients and your replies and your inquiries at 10 o'clock at night, you can say send tomorrow morning at 9:15 a.m. So that way to your clients, it looks like you're replying between the hours of 9 and 5. Call me traditional, call me whatever, but I like a bit of a work-life balance in the sense of working 9 to 5, having evenings, weekends off when I'm not shooting. So I like my emails to go out to my clients between the hours of 9 and 5. So I'll do that for that reason. So that would be just like a little tip. If you're using a studio management software like ShootQ or Tave, or maybe you're using Sprout Studio, who knows, you can schedule emails right in there too, so you don't have to use the Boomerang plugin.
Yeah. Nice, Robert. How do you manage the on the communication side in terms of the availability? Because again, people, I know you prefer the phone, right? You're a big proponent of using the phone. How do you manage clients that just want to text you all the time, or just want to email you all the time, or at odd hours? How do you manage that? How do you set those expectations?
I don't get too much of that. I have a few that have done that, and again, accepting responsibility for that. That's my fault. For communicating with them after hours or those type of things, but overall it doesn't happen because I generally return emails within business hours as well. But I am one that, like, I would like, if I get a decent inquiry that comes in over the website, and I see that it has potential, I might write a quick note back and just acknowledge it. So I say, hey, Lisa, I saw you sent me a form. I'd love to talk to you about your wedding. However, it's 9 o'clock right now, and I'm with my family. Is it okay that we communicate tomorrow? But at least I got back to her and saw that, and I set the expectation telling her that this is my time, not your time. So, that sort of sets a precedent, doing it that way. And I agree with Brian. There's nothing that we do is urgent. I look at my email and check my phones, for the reason that I get something like that. I think we're also a lot of it guilty, and I find myself doing this too, is like you want to return that email because you don't want to forget about it. That's happened to me. You look at something that comes in on your phone, and you're like, oh, I got to do that, and then you get 10 other emails, and it gets pushed down, and then you realize 2 days later that you didn't address that email.
Yeah, you replied to it in your head and then didn't.
Right, because you looked at it. So if that's you, then sometimes you have to then save it as new, and that's something that you need to do is save it as new, so that when you go back at 10 the next morning when you're on your business hours, you can reply to it. As far as texting, my clients don't usually have my personal cell phone number unless I give that to them, on the wedding day. A lot of times I have their phone numbers, of course, and I am making calls from my cell phone, so it can happen that way where they're like, oh, well, he called me. I also actually use it kind of as a tool, with the Sony cameras, they have Wi-Fi in them, and I can send pictures out of the camera. So maybe I'll pick one image on the wedding day at the reception, I'll text it to my couple, and I won't say anything, I'll just send one image. So they might have my phone, and they realize, oh, okay, Robert just texts me now, he's never texted, who is this? But then they realize that's my cell phone number. I am kind of taking that risk. I do have a number on my website, on my contact page, where you can text me, but it is not my personal cell phone number. It's through my phone service. And it does come to my cell phone, but they don't know that, but then I can opt to return that or not return that if I want. So that may be another way, you could look into that. But again, I think it's just, setting boundaries. That's probably the best word, a boundary. But you tell your clients, how you want to be communicated to, and if you want to be a slave to your phone, then be a slave to your phone. But if you don't, then just by your actions on when you return, even if they text you at midnight or 10 or whatever, and you don't address that till the next day, you will subtly set your own personal boundaries. And if it becomes a problem, then I think it's something that you need to write a polite email and be like, hey, Lisa, I know you've sent me a few texts, but as much as possible, I have work time and I try to balance my life out, and so family time starts at 7:30 at night, and I will return your text tomorrow. Or you just sort of let them know, what are they going to say to that? Because again, like Brian said, there is nothing urgent.
Yep.
Just because it's urgent to them doesn't mean it has to be urgent to you. And again, going back, and this may sound harsh too, but once I get a deposit and a contract, they're on my terms. I might bend some of those rules prior to getting the job, but once I have the job and they're on my time, it's my time.
Yep. I'm dealing with that. I've got a client this year that she likes to text with just random questions and things. And I had the first time I replied, and I think that was my mistake. I replied, and I kind of set the expectation that okay, if I text Bruce, Bruce is going to get back to me. And I realized I got to nip that in the bud right away. So I basically just let her know, like, I prefer that if we could keep these communications via email. It's just better for me organizationally to make sure I don't lose track of any important details about your day. And then just let her know, like, text is fine on the day of the wedding if there's an emergency or you need to get a hold of me short notice for some reason. But I said otherwise, if we keep all our communications via email, it just helps me stay on top of things, make sure you're getting the best service.
Well, and think about that. Legally, if it's a he said, she said, you have a record in email if it ever comes down to a legal thing.
Yep.
But in texts, it's a little more ambiguous.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and texts are just, they're hard to keep track of. If I have it all in one place in email, I've got labels for each client job, so when an email comes in from them, it automatically gets labeled, so they're all organized nicely in Gmail for me, and so I can just go back and see that record of communications very, very easily. So I prefer, although I like talking on the phone, I'm with you, Robert. I think you can accomplish a lot with a quick phone call. There is that, again, that can become a he said, she said if you just have that conversation over the phone, as opposed to having things in writing like a contract and having emails and things like that. Then it can sometimes avoid having some of those he said, she said things. So I'm going to guess you're probably both not a big fan of Facebook's recent little algorithm thingy where they post up how quickly you respond to messages. Have you guys both seen this?
I think it's actually a good thing. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I think that just like with text, with Facebook, with Twitter, whatever any other way that a client could get a hold of you, I think that we just need to help them understand that the way that, and again, this is a personal preference thing, communicate to them, this is how I want to be communicating to you. Again, set that expectation. If I get a Facebook message of someone saying, hey, Brian, love your photography, I've been on your page for a while, wonder if you're available for my wedding, I'll reply right away and say, hey, thanks so much for getting in touch. Would you actually mind visiting my website and filling out the contact form there so we have some more details on your wedding, and that way we can communicate via email. So I'll say something like that and I'll reply right away, but I won't have the whole conversation on Facebook, because the problem with our sort of culture today, especially in business, is that we have too many damn inboxes. We've got our email inbox, and potentially we even have more than one email. We have our Facebook inbox. We have our Facebook business page inbox. We have our text messages. It's too complicated. If you're going to run a business and you've got 30, 40 clients on the go at any one given point in time, it's impossible to manage all those inboxes. So I'm of the opinion, take all of those other inboxes, use them as quick little touch points, but then point them to the direction of the inbox that you actually want to use, which for me is email, and I think you guys are kind of agreeing with the same thing here. So my comment would be the exact same on text message. It happens to me sometimes where a client, after their wedding day, because I give them my cell phone number for the wedding day, to text me if anything last minute comes up, I've got it where it's like they get back from their honeymoon and I'll get a text saying, hey, Brian, we're back from our honeymoon. When are the photos ready? And I'll reply sometimes right away, and I have no problem, but I'll actually say, hey, I'm actually not at the office right now. I'm out with the family. Would you mind sending me an email about it? And when I'm back in the office tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, I'll take a look for you. So I'll just set that expectation. I'll nip it in the butt right away, and then that way from that point forward, we know that the communication goes back and forth via email.
Nice. So I want to ask both of you, just if you can give me one or two examples of some expectations that you've set or changed that were a direct result of maybe a client issue or something that kept coming up that you noticed that, hey, I got to set a better expectation for this. Have you got some examples that you can kind of give our audience that maybe might help them in their business?
Well, I've talked about a few of them already, but one that I haven't and we sort of touched on earlier was deliverables of the files. We talked about the JPEG versus the RAW. I actually go into even more depth, and I talk about that it's my prerogative on what I deliver. There's no minimum or no maximum number. Because I'll tell people in general conversation, like, yeah, you're probably going to get back somewhere between 500 and 1,000 images from me from a typical wedding. But I always say, I'd rather deliver 500 great images than say I'm going to give you 1,000 and you have to weed through the garbage. So that's a very ambiguous. There's not a defined number. So I reiterate that in that little clause in the contract. I talk about that it's my prerogative to give them, what I expect, and I give them the best of the best. And I use this word, and I said all other files, once I've edited and delivered, are deleted. And I use the word. They're deleted. They aren't there. There's no hope in getting them back. And yes, I have them because I don't necessarily delete those raw files. I do have one copy at least of everything that I shot, but I might delete on a backup. I don't save all that 10 times. And so I talk about that. And that the stuff, what I give them, I even say, like, you can't see the edits, like it's done and deleted. I said that's part of that. Like, it's deleted. You get what I give you, and that's what you're agreeing to.
Yeah, and do you spell that out in your contract as well?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm sort of just verbalizing because I don't have it in front of me of what that says. But yeah, I mean, I clearly state, because I had one client one time really push hard for the edits, and I said no. And it kind of became an issue, but I kept to my guns and I said no. But when that happened, I was like, all right, I need to bolster that part of my contract and really make it very, very clear. And again, if it's something that you're having issue with and you want the clients to understand that, make them initial that clause as well, because they can't say, well, I didn't read it. I mean, that goes back to you were speeding and you can't tell the officer, I didn't know what the speed limit was, you're going to get a ticket. So it's ultimately, again, our responsibility to know what the rules are. So, the client can't say that, and ultimately they can be mad, you can't ever stop that, but if it goes to a court, then you're covered.
Yeah. Brian, how about you? Have you got an example of a policy or an expectation that you've set that came as a result of, you say you're encountering the same issue, you notice it popping up a lot?
Have you guys ever had it? Maybe our listeners have perhaps also had it, where you're at getting to the end of a wedding day, and your coverage, let's say that you have 6 hours of coverage, and the couple wanted you to stay for the dances or something, and you're looking at your watch saying, looks like we're probably going to be another hour and a half until the dances are actually finished, and that's over and above my 6 hours. Have you guys ever had it where it's like, do you ask the couple, do you want me to stay? Do you like, it's kind of like for me, I know I've had that where it's like things weren't clear or things got delayed and it was going to all of a sudden run into overtime, and I don't necessarily want to give them anything negative on a wedding day, like, hey, would you like me to charge you $300 an hour for another couple hours? Or, it's like, I don't like that as like an experience kind of context. I don't think that that's a great thing to throw on a bride and groom on their wedding day. So I've had that situation happen to me in the past, and something that I've adjusted in my sort of communication strategy with my clients is to be much more explicit about those kinds of boundaries on the wedding day. So first of all, I'll make a point to really have that conversation with them at the first meet and greet about how much time they think they're going to need. Based on their timelines. So I'm not just sort of saying, oh yeah, just go ahead and book my base package, we'll figure out things later. It's kind of like, no, like my base package is 7 hours of coverage. How are things looking? Does it look like we're going to need more than 7 hours? If so, let's kind of get that expectation set now, because that's going to mean you spending more money, and I want that to be upfront. I don't want you to be surprised with that later on. So I'll have that conversation then. Again, just as a side note, I'm a big fan of repeating these kinds of conversations. I think that it's easy to like just say it once and then say, well, I told you so, or well, it's in the contract. I think that we should be saying things more than once, so we kind of continually set the expectations.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, our clients have a lot going on, right? Yeah. So I mean, they're not necessarily going to remember every conversation that we have.
And they might do that conversation like a year out from the wedding.
Right, yeah, exactly. So they may forget about it, right?
Yeah.
So I'll have that conversation at the point of the meet and greet. I'll again have that conversation when they're booking, when they email me and say, okay, ready to book, Brian. I'll say, okay, great. So did you want to book the package that has 7 hours of coverage? You think 7 hours will be enough based on your timelines? So I'll have it a second time then. But the most important one, in my opinion, is that week before the wedding when I'm going over timelines with them. I'll always start the conversation. I always have a pre-wedding meeting with them, either on the phone or in person, and I'll say, okay, so the package you guys have has 7 hours of coverage. We're going to keep that in mind as we're planning out the timelines for today. And then once I walk through the timelines with them, if it looks like there might be a situation where I would need more coverage, I'll say to them, do you want to go ahead and add the extra coverage now so that we're safe for it, or do you want me just to add the extra hours afterwards based on how long I stay for? So I'll have that conversation the week before the wedding. So come the wedding day, if it comes time where it's like, am I going to be staying or am I not? We've already had that conversation, and I don't have to have that the day of the wedding with the couple.
That's a great approach. We ran into that just this past weekend. Things all ran behind, and it was we were done at 9:30, and it was 9, and they hadn't even started speeches and things yet. And so, unfortunately, like we had talked about it, but not. I like your approach there. We had talked about it. We had planned out the timeline. We've done all those things at the wedding consult, but I didn't explicitly talk to them about overtime and going over the timeline, and I should have. And that's something that I think I want to change right from this day. I'm going to change that with our next consult. And I did have to have that awkward conversation, and I kind of went up to them and said, "Hey guys, I see we're running quite a bit behind. It doesn't look like we're going to get to cover everything. Do you want us to stay for another hour or so, and then we'll just bill you afterwards?" And they kind of talked about it, and then they both were like, "No, we'll just end coverage at the planned time." So I was like, okay. I felt kind of bad, and I wanted to stay to get those moments for them, but at the same time, they weren't prepared to pay for us to stay longer. So at the end of the day, it was like, okay, well then, we gave them an extra 15-20 minutes to wrap up the speeches, because we didn't want to leave in the middle of speeches. We let them speeches finish. But then after that, they still had to clear all the tables and make room on the dance floor, and they were going to do a slideshow, and there was going to be a whole bunch of things happening before dances. So it was going to be at least another 45 minutes to an hour before dances were going to start. So we, unfortunately at that point, we said, okay, then we're out of here. Basically, not like that, but So yeah, I like your approach of really covering all of those things. That's a great example.
Yeah, I think that's a great example too, because that's going to be applicable to a lot of our listeners. I have sort of I say up to 10 hours, which is usually more than enough, but people paying me enough money, I'm not going to, if I have to stay an extra hour, I'm just going to do it, and that's my coverage. But I think this is very apropos to a lot of people who are listening who do time coverage. And I like, Brian, to your approach, and just sort of put an explanation point on that. If you ask your client, and again, if it's in the final consultation, and you word it in the way that you said it, it's just brilliant. If, hey, we have 7 hours coverage. A lot of times things do run over on the wedding day. If we're in a position where we're going to look like we're going to need to go in the overtime, how would you like me to handle that? Would you like to just add a couple hours now, or would you just, because I don't like to discuss business on the wedding day. I want you to have a good time. So if we do end up going and we need to stay over, are you okay if I just send you a bill afterwards for the hour or the two, whatever we end up going over, with you full well knowing that it's $500 an hour or whatever. Right. It's such a great way, because you're how would you like me to handle that? And they tell you, and they cannot argue with you later.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. That's excellent. I'm going to start. That's a change I'm making today in our pre-wedding consults, to make sure we're really, because we do. We talk about it when we're going through the timelines and stuff like that. But yeah, when the rubber hits the road and the what hits the fan on the day, then it's like, oh crap, did we actually really talk about that beforehand, or how did we plan to deal with the overage? Like, we've informed them that this is our rate, and yes, we're available to stay for longer. But yeah, having that conversation at the wedding is awkward. So. And
that's exactly what you do, like what you just said, Bruce. Like, I'm going to change that from right now. That's accepting responsibility. That's what I was talking about. I didn't like how it made the client felt. I didn't like how I felt. So I'm going to avoid that in the future by making a change right now.
Yep.
And I think that's probably a good exercise. Like, I guess as kind of in a summary, or I guess a way to empower our listeners to figure out what they want to do in their business, because we could sit here and talk about different examples of this, and there's probably, like we said earlier, hundreds and hundreds of examples. Look at the pain points in your business, look at the points where you've had issues in the past or where there's a miscommunication, and get to the crux of that. Why did that happen that way? And then how can you now fix it? How can you communicate that more effectively so that there's no miscommunication in the future?
Yep.
And I think that's a great way to do it. I can give I have just another example popped in my head. Can I share it quickly?
Yeah. Go for it.
I've often had it, and I'm sure I'll ask you guys if you've ever had this, and I'm sure listeners have had this. at the engagement session, at the end of the session, when it's like, all right, we're done, high fives, good job, hugs, whatever you're doing. For me, in the past, the question then was, okay, so when are we going to get these photos? Like, I'm so excited to see them. When are we going to get them? And in my head, I'm saying, you actually don't get them. Like, I'll give you a gallery within a few weeks, but you don't get the digitals from this. You have to order something from it, because that's the way that my packages are structured. That was always super awkward to finish off an amazing session with my couple to say, oh, right, yeah, no, if you want to go ahead and get something from this, you got to buy it.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, shoot. That was totally a miscommunication on my part, that I wasn't explicit enough in those expectations. So again, there was the pain point. I had that too many times, and I said, I got to fix something in this. And so I made the point then in my meet and greet to say, okay, from your engagement session, what we do is we include just your session. From there, because every couple wants something different, you have to then decide what you want to do with the photos. So your choices might be if you wanted to add the digital files from the engagement session, which you can go ahead and do for $600. The other option is to add this beautiful engagement book, which is $900, which includes the digital files. Most couples will actually go with that. The last option is if you don't want to add anything right now, or if you don't want to add it into your package, we can just include the engagement session itself. I'll give you an online gallery after the engagement session, and then you can choose to purchase prints or digital files by themselves. So I'll have that conversation at the meet and greet to be extremely explicit about it, and I'll repeat it in the email when we're scheduling their engagement session. So come the end of the session, I'll be like, so did you guys think about it? Like, what are you thinking you wanted to do with these, like we were talking about previously? And there's no assumption made that they're going to be getting the files, and then I have to kind of be the bearer of bad news.
Yeah, we've run into that too, just because our packages, there's digitals from the wedding day are included.
Exactly,
so
yeah.
they just assume that the
Exactly.
digitals from everything are included.
Exactly.
And we frame it the same way. It's just the session that's in the thing. And we had one client that they were like, they ripped us a new one over email and called us liars and all the rest of these things. And I said, wait a minute, like, let's go back and take a look at the actual packages, because it was all broken down and spelled out in there. And I said, nowhere in here does it say that the engagement photos are included as part of the package. It's the wedding. And then I looked in the contract, and I didn't specifically say in the contract wedding images. It just said images, and so there was that assumption, right? And so, we had to kind of agree to disagree a little on that, and we worked them a little bit of a deal and gave them the engagement session images at a slightly better price. But from that point forward, I made a course correction, made sure to change that policy, or not policy, but just the wording in the contract, and have that explicit conversation with them beforehand. So another great example.
Cool.
So again, I think these are all great examples about managing client expectations, whether it's deliverables, whether it's talking about availability, timelines, the price. All of these things are expectations that we have to make sure that we're constantly reviewing, looking at, setting with our clients, so that we can avoid any of those customer service issues. And it's the only way to exceed. They always say you want to be exceeding customer expectations, right? Well, the only way you can exceed customer expectations is if you set expectations to begin with. If you don't set any expectations, what is there to exceed, right? So I think we've all got some great good tips and good advice for everybody. So before we're going to take just a short break to thank our sponsor for this episode. But after the break, we're going to dig into the TWiP Weddings mailbag, and we're going to answer a listener question. Okay, we're back to answer a listener question, and each week we will choose a listener question to answer on the show. This week we've got a question from Craig Collins. Craig says, I'm new to wedding photography and I want to put up a website. So I'm going to refer Craig to go back to our episode where we talked all about websites for photographers, but he's got a very specific question. My question is if I have not shot my first wedding, how do I set it up when I don't have any images of weddings I have shot? Would it be okay to use stock images or ask a fellow photographer to use some of his images? Or should I just use images I have that are not wedding related?
Oh, boy.
Wow.
Can of worms on this one.
Okay. My quick opinion, well, okay, no, never use any images that are not yours. That's like the hardest no I've ever said ever on any podcast.
Because you're going to set an expectation if you do that, right?
Yes. Oh, my gosh. Okay, don't use somebody else's images. Second of all, I would actually, sorry, it was Craig, right? Yeah, Craig. Yeah. I would suggest to Craig, and I guess anyone listening, let's really think about what we're trying to do here. You're saying, I haven't shot a wedding yet I want to put a website up advertising that I'm a wedding photographer. My encouragement would to say, don't market yourself as a wedding photographer, and don't try and get hired as a wedding photographer unless you've shot some weddings.
Yeah.
Because I think that you're going to be misleading people, you're going to be setting yourself up for failure, and you're going to be you're going to meet so many challenges in that. So I would say it's not time to market yourself on the web, which is what your website is for, until you're actually ready to be a wedding photographer, which would require you to have photographed some weddings. So I would say get out there, practice, second shoot, assist, do some model shoots, do some styled shoots, do some collaborations, go to workshops, do some training, keep listening to our podcast, do a couple of years of training to be a wedding photographer, get some weddings under your belt as a second shooter, as an assistant, whatever you're doing, with some friends, with some model shoots. You can get a portfolio built up. Once you've refined your skill set, once you're actually on that path to being a wedding photographer and you're confident to say, I think I can start to take bookings now, then you should have a body of work already built up because you've been practicing and you've been doing second shooting. So that would be my suggestion, and only once you've hit that point should you get a website going.
Yep. Robert, anything to add?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, when he is ready, when Craig's ready, he should go to Squarespace to build his website.
Right, yes.
Super easy. I mean, it's just, so he should check that out. Check out the sponsor. It's interesting. I just had a very similar question. I have another blog that's called Wedding Photography 411 that I occasionally post to, but there's a lot of good content, but it's specifically aimed at the bride and groom. But a photographer wrote me off it, because I do get a lot of photographers look at it, and said pretty much the same thing. Like, he said, is there a set price list that I should start? I'm new, but I have professional equipment, And I basically, my answer in a nutshell was, well, first of all, just because you own a camera doesn't mean that you're a professional photographer. I said, I think you owe it to your clients to, be honest. I said, it's okay if both people know, again, communication, that you're new and they offer to pay you $500 to shoot their wedding. Well, they're taking a risk too, and you're gathering experience. I said, but don't put yourself out there like, don't charge $2,000 because you see that's what everyone's doing, but you have no idea. I said, second shoot for other photographers, get experience. And I said, there is really no set price. You can set your price at whatever you want, but, raise your price based on your experience. And so it was kind of along the same lines. But, yeah, I would say the same thing. And Craig, if you want to put anything up there, I mean, you can start, because it's the website, you can always change images. Yeah, put up what you've done, even if you've never shot a wedding. Put up your scenic pictures, put up whatever. You just never know. Someone might be like, wow, I really love your landscapes. Hey, we're getting married, or whatever. But it's just a good start. It's a good way to practice, putting your brand out there and working on that and developing it. You've got to start somewhere.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we hear stories all the time. There's a whole website, devoted to, stop stealing photos of, photographers that have stolen other photographers' images, done their work. And what you've done is you're setting yourself up for failure, because all you're going to do is you're going to set an expectation. So there was one photographer, I remember, he was stupid enough to actually steal images from Jerry Gionis. Like, how stupid you got to be
I remember that.
From one of the top wedding photographers in the world. Put them all over his site, said, yeah, this is my work, great. And then they go out and they shoot the wedding, and it's like absolutely nothing even close, right? So now you've got a pissed off client, you've got, you're drawing the fire from the entire internet world when they find out you've stolen Jerry's work, right? You're just setting yourself up for so many issues and so many problems that is it really worth it to get that one wedding or book a couple of weddings and make a couple $100? Is it really worth it? Like, no, don't. Just don't. No. Excellent. All right, so if you have a question, like Craig did, we want to hear from you. And so you can head on over to thisweekinphoto.com and leave your questions and comments on the blog post, or you can also submit your questions by emailing us at twipwed@thisweekinphoto.com, or just send out a tweet and use the hashtag twipwed, and we'll keep an eye out for those as well. So finally, before we close off the show, we want to go into our Picks of the Week segment, and each episode we will share a photography-related item that we think would benefit wedding photographers. Our picks can be anything as long as they're somehow related to photography or the business of photography. And Brian, I'm going to throw it over to you. I know you made a pick earlier, kind of a pre-pick, which was Boomerang for Gmail, but do you have a second? Is that going to be your pick, or? It can be your pick. That's okay.
Okay, yeah, I still made my pick. I'll quickly. My other pick was going to be my Apple Watch. But I think I can reserve that for another one, and I can talk a little bit more in detail later on that one. But yeah, Boomerang for Gmail, oh my gosh, it is like a lifesaver. Not only for the reason that I talked about earlier, where you can basically take an email, reply to it, and then say send later, but you can actually, let's say that you're sitting in your inbox this morning. I have this thing, or there's this concept called inbox zero, and I don't want to go into too much detail on like inbox clarity and sort of inbox management, but I'm of the opinion that your inbox should not be your to-do list. Your inbox should only be things that you haven't done yet. So my goal at the end of every day is to get to what's called inbox zero, which means I've gotten all my emails replied to, and once I reply to them, I file them away into an archive folder. So Boomerang for Gmail, Robert, why are you laughing?
I've tried that.
Yeah. There's a lot. Maybe
I've attempted that several times.
Maybe
Robert's at like inbox 325. That's his.
We should do it. We should do an episode just on inbox clarity. I think that's like an amazing topic, and I think it's something a lot of photographers struggle with.
Ooh, I like that.
But regardless, I won't go too deep into the inbox zero idea. But Boomerang allows you to basically take an email that's in your inbox, and let's say that it's not time right now to deal with whatever's in there. Maybe somebody says something like, oh, hey, next week, can we talk about blah, blah, blah. Replying to it right now doesn't make sense, and keeping it in my inbox for a week doesn't make sense. So I can use Boomerang and say, hey, Boomerang, take this email, get it out of my inbox for 7 days, and return it back in 7 days from now. So it's kind of away from my view until I actually need to act on it. So I love those kinds of things because it allows me to have clarity and not always see that inbox or that email every single time I open up my inbox. So Boomerang for Gmail is amazing, and it's free. So I mean, you really can't go wrong with that.
Nice. And where can people go to get that?
I think it's just boomerangforgmail.com. We'll have a link to it in the show notes.
Yeah,
but
we'll
if you just
link to it in
Google
the
it.
notes,
Yeah, it's right there.
Nice, and it's free.
Yep.
Fantastic. Excellent. Robert, what have you got for us this week?
Well, so I know last week I talked about a new camera that I got. And
Yes.
I have to because I'm so excited about it. I just got for those that listening or viewing the new A7R2. This camera is just so amazing, and I know by the time the show comes out in a month or so, it'll definitely be even more. But wow, I can't say enough about this thing. It's I love shooting Sony stuff, but this camera has just really blown me away. I know, and I get a ton of questions from people that are like, should I switch? Why should I switch? The one thing that I can say is, like, if you're on the fence, like, go rent the camera. Go rent it and see, what it does and what it can do for you. But wow, it's just they have a new back illuminated sensor in it, which allows many of the functions from the previous cameras that each had a different function in it because of that sensor. But silent shutter, 5-access point, high ISO, phase detection plus contrast focusing, 4K video internal. I mean, there's so many awesome things about this camera. So
Yeah.
next episode, I promise I won't plug a camera, but I'm excited about that one. So it has to be just my natural pick of the week.
I am. Yeah, I'm really seriously wanting to take a hard look at the Sony cameras now that I'm seeing all the reports and all the information coming out on the A7R2, and it's like, The one thing that I'll say, so that I can be a little bit neutral, it is a big file. It's a 42 megapixel file, which I personally think is a little bit big. Yep.
We can't shoot our whole wedding that way. So my thought already is I'm going to shoot maybe my bride and groom pictures and my family pictures with that. And then, like I've mentioned before, like I'll use my A6000 to shoot getting ready and maybe cocktail candids and, even during the ceremony sometimes, depending on, because it's just lighter and flexible and more easy.
Yep.
And, at the reception, I don't need obviously that big a file as well, but I really like using the small cameras and, slowly but surely stepping away from my A99.
Yeah. I want to do a full show with you and really dig into the Sony ecosystem a little bit and talk a bit more about some of the advantages that those cameras have over sort of the traditional DSLRs, because I think the market it's shifting, and I think Nikon and Canon are really, really struggling to kind of keep up. Particularly Canon. I was out with a friend this week, and she had a new D750, and it had some really cool features in it, like the ability to Wi-Fi photos to her phone and all that kind of stuff. And I just don't see Canon doing any of that stuff, and it's really starting to frustrate me. So
I think when I say part of Canon's problem, I don't mean it's a problem, because I shot Canon prior to shooting Sony, and I loved my Canons. I wasn't disappointed, but when I saw the opportunity of like, well, maybe there's something better out there, and as photographers, we're such creatures of habit. But I'm happy that I opened my mind and made the jump.
Yeah.
But Canon is like so entrenched in lenses.
Yeah.
If they make a mirrorless camera, it basically puts all their lenses obsolete, and that's their biggest problem or their struggle, I think, for them, because they have to make a whole new line of lenses, and therein lies a huge challenge for them.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens here in the next couple of years with both, the big players, and see what happens. But excellent pick. I'm of the mindset I want to try and rent one when they have them available here at my local camera store, and just take one out for a spin and spend a couple of weeks with it and really dig into it and see what I think. So, well, my pick, really, it's a great blog post actually, and it's Brian had written about a year ago a really great blog post on setting client expectations. So over at sproutingphotographer.com. So we'll put a link to it. But he really kind of breaks down a lot of the stuff that we talked about today about setting client expectations. So it's a really great article. So that's going to be my pick this week. All right. So that brings us to the end of another episode of TWiP Weddings. We want to thank our sponsor for their support of this episode. And we want to remind you to send in your questions for the show and share your thoughts by commenting on the blog post for this episode. So before we wrap up, Brian had to duck out. He had an important meeting to get to. So we'll have links to all of his social presences on the website, but you can find him. Of course, Sprouting Photographer is where he does a lot of his posting and blogging, and we'll have links to all of his other sites on there as well. But Robert, where can people find you, and what are you up to over the next coming weeks?
Same thing with me. Coming weeks, end of the week, I'm getting on a plane going to Colorado for a few days to visit some family, and then I come back and fly back to California to shoot a wedding down in San Diego area. And so that's what I have coming up. And as far as getting a hold of me, finding me, it's pretty much all under my name on my social media. At Robert Evans is Instagram and Twitter. RobertEvans.com is the website, and Facebook, Robert Evans Studios. You can find me there. And Google Plus is Robert Evans 101.
Excellent. Sounds good. Again, we'll have links to everybody's profiles in the show notes. And if you're looking for me, you can find us. Our website is momentsindigital.com, and our blog and everything is there. And then on all the social media networks, you'll find me at Bruce Clark, and that's Clark has an E at the end. So feel free to follow me on any of those. So again, just be sure to visit our website at This Week in Photo. And thanks again for listening to TWiP Weddings, raising the bar one wedding at a time.